Welcome to the Heavy Spoilers Show. I'm your host Paul. In this video, we're breaking down Day of the Dead. Released 7 years after Dawn, George A. Romero's Day of the Dead brings us back to the zombie apocalypse. Whereas the previous two movies focused on the zombies taking over, we're at the point now where they outnumber the humans. We don't really know what's left of humanity, but what remains scrambles to survive in an underground bunker. Now, while this is widely considered the worst of Romero's Dead films, I actually still think it's quite good. Just had a tall order following two of the greatest horror movies of all time, and though it was slammed at the time, I think people have grown to appreciate it. There's a lot to like here, and Day of the Dead brings the social commentary of the first two films full circle and leaves us with some really cool and thought-provoking ideas. Throughout this video, we're going to be breaking down all the hidden details and symbolism layered throughout the film and try and bring some justice to this misunderstood classic. If you enjoy it, please hit the thumbs up and also check out our Night of the Living Dead inspired shirt below. We also have our Misfit inspired Skeletor one along with our Obsession one as well. There's lots of shirts on there too, and we also have some big sales as well that all help videos like this get made, so thank you if you picked one up. Now, before we get into the movie itself, we have to talk about some of the behind the scenes drama that led to the final version of the film. This played into the overall ending and pretty much affected the reaction to the film. So pay attention. Get off your phone. What do you mean you're watching it on your phone? Either way, when George A. Romero sold Dawn to the United Film Distribution Company, he was unfortunately locked into a 3-picture deal. Now, despite Dawn of the Dead's massive success, Romero was in no rush to make a sequel, even against the pressure. But with both Night and Dawn being heavily laid with Romero's views on society during the time they were made, he liked the idea of revisiting the zombie genre every decade to reflect on how we all live in a society. Instead of doing another zombie film immediately, Romero then made Night Riders in 1981, and this was followed by Creepshow alongside Stephen King in 1982. Now, this was mainly because this is just what he wanted to do, despite everyone wanting a zombie movie. I actually think a lot of Romero's films didn't get the love they deserved until much later on, and while some of them are admittedly a miss, you've got to respect the dude's love for the game and willingness to take risks. However, Night Riders was a flop despite its high budget, and Creepshow was owned by Warner Brothers, so those guys took the majority of the profits. This left Romero and his company with virtually nothing, and the sad thing is they didn't even Warner Brother. But because of this, the studio were like, no more passion projects. So basically he was forced to go back to the Dead series, and at first struggled to really get an idea of what Day would be. Due to the rights, he also wasn't allowed to use any of the same characters from Dawn, so he couldn't just pick up where they left off with Fran and Peter flying away in the helicopter. However, this was the 80s, baby, meaning there was no shortage of political issues for Romero to pull from. The US was in the height of the Reagan era, the AIDS epidemic was swooping the nation, the Cold War was getting red hot, and the war on drugs was devastating communities. Romero saw how society's ability to trust each other, specifically the government, had only gotten worse since tackling the theme in Dawn, and thus he focused on a small group of people conflicting with the government. The Now Playing podcast described it as Gone with the Wind with zombies, with it being a gigantic tale that would cost $7 million. It was going to have thousands and thousands of extras, take place across massive locations, and going to be the biggest zombie movie of all time. $7 million as well, that was completely unheard of for a horror film, but the studio thus wanted to ensure that the movie would receive an R. However, Romero wanted it to be unrated. The podcast then kind of talked about the dilemma he was in and how he could either get more money to make their movie or less money and go and make his own, which ultimately he opted for. But this forced Romero to rewrite the script and eliminate most of the big action sequences and set locations, which is why most of the film is set in a cave. And I remember seeing the movie for the first time and thinking, this is rather small. The original script, though, was reportedly around 200 pages long, with the final version coming in at just 88. We'll talk more about how this ultimately screwed Romero in the end, but the director maintained that while he had to scrap a lot of the script, the revised version still captured the essence of what he was going for. And he did actually say that Day is his favourite of the Dead series. Not sure I agree, George, but let's give it another shot and break down the movie. Now, we open with a wide shot of a woman sitting with her head down in a bare white room. This is similar to the walls of an insane asylum, and it represents the fear and isolation that we see the survivors experience throughout the film. Romero also used a similar shot start to open up Dawn, with Fran sleeping in a newsroom with the carpet resembling blood. Sarah then looks up at a calendar on the wall, and it shows the date as October 31st. What a way to celebrate Halloween. Now the year isn't specified, but the original script says day takes place 5 years after Dawn, which was in 1978. We'll circle back to this date more in just a bit because it does become important later on, but the movie was actually released on Tuesday, October 1st, and with most people probably watching it around Halloween, I can imagine at the time they were doing the Leo pointing meme at the screen. November 1st is also celebrated as All Saints Day, and November 2nd is considered All Souls Day. However, the period between the 31st and November 2nd is also known as the Day of the Dead. So, the Day of the Dead is happening on the Day of the Dead. In real life, this is a celebration in which people honor the dead and welcome their return, which is basically what happens with the zombies. As Sarah walks towards the calendar, she then becomes fixated on the picture of people farming pumpkins above the dates. This is her most likely remembering what life was like before the zombies took over, and according to the law, she was actually a pumpkin farmer. She then touches the picture, and we're hit with a jump scare of zombie hands bursting out the wall. This symbolizes how that sort of life's no longer possible, and that everyone will inevitably become part of the undead. It's a super cool effect as well that basically starts off the movie, and it's since been mimicked in lots of different films. Now we then cut to Sarah in a helicopter and see... It was all a dream! In the helicopter, we see Sarah is joined by a fellow soldier, Miguel, who's clearly already losing it. He's tightly gripping a religious necklace around his neck, which is the first time we really see some of the religious undertones that are scattered throughout the film. Joining them are also John and McDermott. And I'll say it now, best characters in the movie. Them sitting around drinking and chilling is exactly what I'd be doing. In the intro, they basically say they're just there to do their jobs as pilots, and will leave both of them behind without a second thought if there's any sign of trouble. They even argue that touching down isn't in their contract, but yeah, you kind of wonder what contracts are even worth in this world. Also, really like how Romero introduces us to our main group of survivors in a helicopter, which calls back to how Dawn ended with Fran and Peter flying away in one. And while we don't see where either of those characters ended up, it does feel like a nice way to pick up on where we left off and show how things have progressed from Dawn in today. Also, I love the score here, and I think it's some of the best music in all the films. I actually sampled this on the Gorillaz' first album, and I know that because that was the first CD I ever bought. It really adds to the atmosphere though, and I love as they hit the streets and we hear that. Just echoes through the empty sidewalks and skyscrapers, and you might notice the locations notably different to Pittsburgh. That's what we've come to associate with Romero's zombie films, but this was actually shot in Florida, which is where everyone goes to retire to, which is pretty much how they end the movie. That also explains why there's alligators, and beyond that we have skeletons rotting in the street and a newspaper that reads, "The Dead Walk," while money lines the stairs to the bank. This is such a subtle way to show that society has collapsed, and that money and everything we once thought had value now mean absolutely nothing. It's parallel to how money and consumerism meant everything to the survivors in Dawn, and this is what ultimately led to the zombies reclaiming them all. Now if you zoom in on the newspaper as well, you can also see various headlines alluding to this complete collapse. There's one that reads, "Whereabouts of President Unknown, Food Supply Dwindles," and "Man Bites Man." We are then introduced to our first zombie, the incredibly handsome Dr. Tongue. He's one of the coolest zombies in the entire film, and just the perfect first one to show us how far the effects have come. These aren't just people wandering around covered in blue paint, they're now grotesque and hideous. Now Dr. Tongue is actually a head mold of effects artist Tom Savini, which he accidentally ripped the jaw off of when trying to drill a hole into the face. This resulted in them going with the tongue gag and then mechanizing the eyes to move around and blink. Dr. Tongue was also a hand puppet, which I don't know why, but that makes it even more unsettling. Now let's also take a moment to talk about horror master Tom Savini, as he really pulled out all the stops here. After Dawn of the Dead, Savini really blew up, and he honed his expertise doing Friday the 13th Part 1 and 1984's The Final Chapter. Looking to top his previous work and really shock people, Savini and his crew of fellow artists and friends took up a shop in his garage and just started pumping out prosthetics, head molds, and zombie appliances for months on end. Many consider this as Savini's best work to this date as well, and yeah, when we get to the more brutal scenes later on, he does some incredible work. We then see the other zombies coming out the woodwork, and this includes two dudes who sort of push the alligator down the stairs. Now this was of course a real life alligator, and the two zombies following it were animal wranglers who brought it to the set. As the zombies then make their way to the sound, we can see just how many of them there are. Miguel in comparison is just one guy, and it cements how much they outnumber the living. Now while this wasn't shot in Pittsburgh, Romero still used the same casting agency used for Dawn of the Dead and specifically requested that all the extras be called. There were also just a shitload of people who happily showed up to be a zombie in the new Romero film, and they had no shortage of volunteers. Like Dawn, they all did it for the love of the game, as they were all paid with a hat that said, "I played a zombie in Day of the Dead," a copy of the newspaper signed by Romero, and a crisp $1 bill. The dead silence of the radio was then drowned out by the cries of the undead, and thus they realise there's no one left to rescue. The group then go back to their base, which we learn is an underground bunker operated by the military. Sarah then warns them that if they refuel the chopper, it'll make a hell of a lot of noise, and this will attract more zombies, which foreshadows some stuff for the ending. We then see that everyone is just sort of lounging around, with one dude keeping morale high by tending to his weed farm. When all else is gone, 420 survives. Blaze that, as they say, if my mum's watching. Now no one really knows what to do, and though they found a way to stay alive alongside the zombies, there's no real plan of where to go from here. We'll see how this inevitably leads to them turning on each other throughout the film, and with zombies becoming more human, you do get the feeling that the humans are going extinct. Kinda like the Neanderthal.
It means you're a caveman, asshole! You're a fucking throwback!
As Sarah tries to get Miguel out of the chopper, we can see he's still having some kind of existential crisis, and he snaps at Sarah for trying to help him. Now Miguel is a very interesting character because while he's shown as completely off his rocker from the jump, he's actually kind of the most sane person in there. In this scene, he says it's insane that everyone's acting normal and that it's kind of crazy how calm everyone is. And yeah, I mean, he's totally right. What they are doing is insane and will ultimately be pointless. But everyone else still scrambles to maintain some sort of resemblance to what life was like before and the hopes they can have it again. Even the fact as well that Sarah's dreaming about calendars with farmers on, it just shows she hopes that things can get back to normal. Miguel is the only one who seems to fully grasp the situation, accepting that the world will no longer exist and that there's no way back, which is terrifying. We'll see how this theme applies to each character throughout the film, but one last detail here is that Miguel is played by Tim DeLeo. He was actually Romero's best friend in Pittsburgh, and yeah, being friends with George Romero must have been very fucking sweet back in the day, because you were guaranteed a gig. I will be in the next zombie movie. Before going down in the bunker, Sarah then notices a fresh pile of graves on the base, and we learn from one of the soldiers that the leader of the operation died while they were out. That was Major Cooper, and now the change of power is basically what causes further division.
Major Cooper, he died this morning.
And then there were 12.
I did wonder as well if this was playing into the religious themes with it being tied to the 12 disciples. We also see all the zombies surrounding the base outside a chain link fence, playing in the symbolism of how this is not a safe haven, but instead just a prison. We also get some foreshadowing for their fate and how they decide to just go and find an island.
Let's get in that old whirly bird there, find us an island someplace, get juiced up, and spend what time we got left soaking up some sunshine.
The group then heads into the bunker, and we get our first look at where they've been spending the apocalypse. Now, this was shot in the Wampum Mine, Pennsylvania, which Romero just sort of knew about and decided to use when he had to confine his script to the bunker. Previously, it had been used as a bomb shelter, an underground storage facility where they held old Hollywood negatives, boats from the harsh winter, and government supplies. The other scenes of the hallways, cafeteria and lab were all part of the management facility within the mine, and the crew basically utilised the entire thing. The mine was so big it even had a mile-long lake underground where the crew would fuck around and go swimming with headlamps in. They also never found the end of the mine, despite numerous little excursions while filming. Romero even joked that the Morlocks could live in the deeper parts of the cave, and a bunch of people got pretty sick from basically being trapped there for 3 months. And yeah, when they have all the crap down there in the air and even the bats, you can understand how you'd get sick. Like at one point we even see a bat scaring John, and I did wonder if that was a real one because there's a couple of bits where they're just flying around in the background. The conditions were so rough though that they actually had a guy called Dr. Feelgood who would come in and shoot them up with B12. This was because they basically didn't see sunlight the entire time they were shooting, as they'd start at 6 AM and then work until the night. Yeah, pretty rough stuff, but let's get back to how these people are holding up in this never-ending hellhole. As the group return to the safety of the bunker, we're introduced to Steels and Rickles. who I used to call Bebop and Rocksteady. They take Sarah and Miguel to go and wrangle up some of the zombies wandering the cave, and as they make their way to the zombie pen, we can also see a bunch of cars and boats that were stored in the mine that we mentioned before. And I like to think some guy in Pittsburgh watched this movie and saw how his boat was getting smashed up and thought, what the fuck?
This shows the 15th is the last time you took any out. That can't be right.
Oh yeah, we forget to write them up sometimes, you know.
This also highlights that the standards are getting sloppier and that the soldiers are losing their order due to the pointlessness of what they're doing, which will eventually cause their downfall.
It's essential.
They then go to a makeshift pen which they use to capture the zombies and then deliver them to Dr. Logan, aka Frankenstein. Rickles then makes an offhand comment about how they're scared of what Dr. Frankenstein will do to them.
Scared. You know what'll happen when Frankenstein gets them.
Sarah says this indicates that they're actually learning, foreshadowing Dr. Frankenstein's greatest creation, who we'll meet later on. And he's the best character in the movie as well. I know I've said that before, but I really mean it this time. But this is a major theme of the movie. However, I want to point out how Romero portrays the zombies here compared to the humans. Romero presents the zombies here as sad and helpless, which juxtaposes the living, who are shown as violent, unprepared, and just overall pieces of shit.
Come on, you fish brains! What the hell's the matter with you?
This reminds me a lot of how Romero similarly introduced the zombies during the tenement scene in Dawn of the Dead. Here, we have a similar situation where the zombies pose no immediate threat, but it's the human stupidity and inability to work together that puts them in danger. This cements how we are the real threat to our own survival. As Steele and Rickles continue being idiots, they capture one of the zombies, but we can clearly see Miguel is definitely not in the right state of mind to be doing this. Guy's just being exhausted and forced to do this mission when, you know, someone smart would have been like, maybe don't take him on the job. He's just gonna fuck it up. And fuck it up he does. Miguel lets go of the noose that's holding the zombie, and it almost gets Rickles. Fortunately, or unfortunately depending on how you look at it, Sarah's able to grab the pole before it gets to him, and she gets the situation under control. Steele is furious though, and he holds Miguel over the pen, but Sarah brings down the temperature. It again shows that she's the only one in control, and easily the most competent in the bunker. Knowing she'll probably do it, Steele then lets him down, and they take their rage out on the zombies by torturing them. And honestly, they look more terrified than anyone. This is showcased with the reaction of the woman zombie, as she doesn't sound scared, but instead is just desperate. You can even see her look at her fellow zombie almost as if she needs comfort. It's a really cool and subtle way Romero starts to make us sympathise with the zombies, and it emphasises how they work together while we stay divided. We then meet back up with Sarah and Miguel, where she tries to convince him to take a sedative so he can chill the fuck out. However, Miguel is pissed that she made him look like a fool in the zombie pen, and then slaps the shit out of her. Not once, but twice. Fucking piece of shit. Now he's clearly an absolute mess, and he then breaks down in her arms, which allows her to stab him in the back. And goddamn, Sarah can just not catch a break here. I think it shows how caring that Sarah is though, as even after being abused, she still wants to help him. As we later learn, the pair are boyfriend and girlfriend, but you kind of get the feeling that they've kind of lost the love. And if you thought the slap seemed a bit harsh, well, that's because Laurie told the actor to actually slap her so it looked authentic. Now we then meet the rest of the military chuckleheads along with the scientist Fisher. He's played by John Amplas, who also starred Romero's 1977 film Martin. The pair had a long professional relationship, and he cameoed in most of his films. This is also where we meet Captain Rhodes, who's taken over command of this clown show. This gives us another fun detail in Romero's Zombieverse, as Rhodes is played by Joseph Pilato. If you cast your mind way back into time, back to Dawn of the Dead, he also played a police officer there. Thus, many believe that Pilato is playing the same character and that Rhodes survived and made it out to this position. However, this theory is unfortunately a bust, as the credits of Dawn of the Dead list Pilato's character as being Randy Kovitz. But yeah, I'll let people have their fun with theories, I fucking love it. But the real reason that Pilato was recast for Day was that Romero used the same talent agency as Dawn, and George thought he was just a really good actor. Pretty cut and dry, but I still like to pretend it's the same character. One thing I will point out as well that kind of supports the theory is that we can see Rhodes wears the same type of ring that Roger wore in Dawn of the Dead. According to IMDb trivia, this was Roger's Police Academy ring, and this would fit with Rhodes being the same character from Dawn, since they both were members of the Philadelphia Police Department. However, it's most likely that they just used the same prop for Rhodes because they had it at hand at the time. But I will never forget those theory times I had over the years.
Major Cooper promised
Major Cooper is dead.
I'm in command now.
Fisher then tries to advocate for more sanitary equipment for him and Dr. Frankenstein's equipment, but Rhodes doesn't give a shit about any of that nerd stuff. He's not even sure if they need any of the civilians in general, and demands that they get results.
I'm not so sure we need you at all.
Fucking A.
I'm not even sure just what the hell it is you're doing in there.
Sarah then tries to tell him about how Miguel's completely lost it, but Rhodes again doesn't seem to give a shit and just says they should lock him up. Rhodes then says he might just cut their little love affair short so that the rest of the guys can have their way with her. This is explored more in stuff like 28 Days Later, and you do kind of wonder how a lone woman would fare in these situations. It shows how the military are the real threat though, not the zombies. Not only is Rhodes super creepy, but we see he's also fully willing to put his and other lives at risk by not taking Miguel off active duty, despite just saying that he's sick of losing men due to the scientist's little project. Like, the dude's so focused on being an arsehole that he can't recognise Miguel's incompetence puts them all at risk. One thing I also want to point out is, notice how Rhodes is the only one who's clean shaven. He still dresses in full uniform, just like me, and is trying to hold on to some semblance of order. Because that's what keeps him in power. He even barks orders at the others and doesn't like any sign of disrespect.
Yes, sir. Fuck you, sir.
This is such a great line as well, and you can see how it sits with Rhodes.
You better watch yourself. I mean physically watch yourself.
All the guys know Sarah is in danger though, but she remains hopeful that they can knock some sense into the others. This shows she's the only one willing to play ball and find some common ground. Everyone seems to just keep to their cliques, but she's the only one who interacts with all the factions. This is why she'll be one of the only characters to make it out of here alive, as though the pilots don't really give a crap about any of this shit, she's able to connect with them, and thus they start to trust her. This parallels how the disintegration of trust in society has turned people against each other, and this prevents them from working towards their common interest. Here Romero shows how this fundamental lack of trust in society extends to even those in charge who are meant to lead and protect us, but are unable to see the bigger picture and work together. We're then introduced to Dr. Frankenstein, who's working away in his lab and reviewing his data. As Sarah walks into the room, we can see him surrounded by his experiments. It's a gory scene with him covered in blood and bodies dissected on tables. A zombie even has most of its head cut off with just the brain remaining, which we can't show because of YouTube, but it's very, very horrible. I think the way as well that we're introduced to the character, it kind of shows that Frankenstein's the real monster. And that's a bit of Frankenstein subtext for you there, mate. Upon coming in, Sarah is almost grabbed by Bob, and we'll learn a lot more about him later on. However, notice how he doesn't try to go for seconds after initially scaring her. Instead, he just kind of stares curiously at her and almost kind of looks like he's sorry for what he's done. The Now Playing podcast also brought up how he might even be sending up the 80s fascination with characters like Gizmo and E.T. They kind of got dropped amongst humans and did very cute things like playing on music, hitting the thumbs up, and ultimately were just cute, goofy, and fun. Bob is kind of played up in the same sort of way in a horror sense, with him kind of being a grotesque version of that. Frankenstein then goes into a bunch of sciencey mumbo-jumbo about how the zombies function. I'll spare you the fancy scientific explanation of how the brain works, but he basically says that the zombies' decay attacks the parts of the brain that give us cognitive function. This leaves only the primal instinct located deep in the core of our brains. He then kind of talks about that being the central prehistoric jelly that we inherited from reptiles, and while that still doesn't really answer what caused this decay to happen, I think Romero's explanation here of the virus in general is actually quite fascinating. To me, Romero's implying that the violence and brutality that humans are driven by is a result of humanity's primal instinct to hurt each other. As Dr. Frankenstein puts it, that is inherently within us all and has led to our demise. It calls back to that infamous line in Dawn,
"When there's no more room in hell, the dead will walk the earth."
That was to show how we'd been so bad and sinful to one another that hell was now filled to the brim. If we keep being evil, then hell shall be filled, and it makes the zombie apocalypse inevitable. Yay! Frankenstein then continues to explain how the zombies don't need blood or internal organs in order to maintain motor functions. Their desire for human flesh is purely instinctual. This is when he reveals the brain guy, and little fun fact here, Savini and the crew call this guy Moose Clit. No, I am not joking. The effect is not only one of my favourites though, but Savini also pulled it off by using a real actor whose head went through a hole in the table, and they then glued the moose clit to his neck. He's not credited, but the actor's name was Barry Grass, who I couldn't really find much information on. But shout out to that dude, because you can see in some of the behind the scenes footage that he was gasping for air, trapped under Moose Clit, and unable to move for nearly an entire day. And I've given you a big applause for the dedication to the craft. Back to Dr. Frankenstein, he then shows that despite the zombie no longer having its primal instinct at the core of its brain, the body's still able to move. This proves that the zombies can still function without the primal instinct to kill, and possibly be taught reason. However, Sarah isn't really impressed, and she starts pointing out how a 15-hour complicated surgery that only a few people in the world can do isn't a practical solution to bringing back humanity. But the mad doctor knows that he is getting close and will potentially create a solution. Sarah then kind of sides with the army though, and sees him as trying to define the problem rather than cure it. Here we can also see how the theme of not letting go applies to Frankenstein, as he's unwilling to accept that humanity's gone and will stop at nothing to bring it back. Even if it's basically an impossible task at this point. You cannot train every zombie to be Bub. He's blinded to the reality though that humanity is the reason they're in this situation, which his own science pretty much proves. This calls back to the question that Romero proposed to us in Dawn with logic versus humanity. Do we do the logical thing and kill the zombies without emotion, or do we maintain our humanity and figure out a way to handle the zombies without more violence? We saw in Dawn of the Dead how losing our humanity inevitably leads to more death, and here we see Dr. Frankenstein has fully turned away from his humanity in favour of logic to bring society back. This creates a paradox in which him losing his humanity is what prevents him from solving the real problem and saving the human race. We can see this represented as Sarah says he's just going nuts slicing up zombies and notices one of his experiments just sprawled out on the floor, which he just brushes off as a failure that needed to be destroyed. We then see the full extent of how far Frankenstein's willing to go, as Major Cooper's jacket's lying on the floor as well. And oh my god, Moose Clit is Major Cooper. Sarah's of course terrified though, because if the grunts find out, they're gonna probably kill them. We then get another one of the doctor's fucked up projects which tries to get up off the operating table. He then just spills his guts all over the floor, and then the doctor just drills into his head. And yeah, it's just a horror show where he's not really making any progress.
But you're just proving theories that were advanced months ago.
Now for the shot of the zombie's guts spilling out onto the floor, Savini of course used real pig guts because, as he says, nothing is as good or splatters like the real thing. The pig intestines were then shoved into a fake torso and wrapped together with a fake rubber intestine so that when the actor turned, the real guts would then slide down the rubber one and splatter out onto the ground. And if you think that's bad, just wait until you see how bad it gets when they try the same effect with Rhodes later. Bub then recalls in terror seeing the driller as well, and it shows that the creatures feel fear. We then cut back to the cafeteria where everyone is once again sitting around arguing. Also, love how you can see Terry Alexander almost crack up laughing as McDermott tells Steele to fuck off about his drinking. Pay close attention and you'll notice he puts his hand over his mouth, not to break character, but I seen it.
I'll have to lay off the fucking booze, Steele, because there won't fucking be any of it fucking left.
McDermott then comes to the chilling realization that they are probably the only ones left. In what's also a little nod to Dawn, he also says,
And all the shopping malls are closed.
We also get a quick cameo from Greg Nicotero. In case you don't know, he's a special effects artist who was the protege of Savini and went on to become a horror legend in his own right. Nicotero is the mastermind behind the effects for The Evil Dead 2, From Dusk Till Dawn, and also The Walking Dead. The effects there are of course a massive evolution of this, and we also see him pop up later as a head in Dr. Frankenstein's lab. Sick of all the men's bickering, Sarah then gets up to leave, but Rhodes threatens to have her shot. Sarah then calls his bluff, but Rhodes doesn't back down and orders Steele to shoot her.
Shoot that woman.
Bang! You're dead!
I absolutely love this interaction. As you can see, Steele thinks it's all a joke and plays along while cackling with Rickles. However, he quickly realizes it isn't, and yeah, it's such a tense moment. Realizing this is no longer just a regular day at the office and that Rhodes will 100% kill her, John then goes to step in front of Sarah to protect her. However, she instead decides to take his advice and sits back down. Really quickly as well, I just want to point out how not only do we see John is willing to step up to protect Sarah, but you can also see McDermott go for his gun when Rhodes pulls out his. This shows that he's also willing to involve himself in this little shootout to protect her. I love this little character touch as well, and despite what they said earlier about not giving a shit about anybody else, both John and McDermott are still willing to put themselves at risk for someone else. Rhodes then makes it very clear that there will be no more fucking about on his watch and that they need to start remembering they're at war. Fisher then tries to stand up to Rhodes, but he riles up his troops by reminding them of the men they have lost and that they should be killing the zombies on sight, not keeping them as pets. Now, I think one of my big problems with this script is the fact that we don't really get much about Cooper or even how the character died. I think you'd add so much to the movie if we saw the rule under Cooper, how bad that was, and also had like Rhodes waiting in the wings and just acting like a dickhead the whole time. I think if then you had Cooper die and Rhodes taking over, you'd have a sense of how bad things are gonna be now he's in charge.
Out of the frying pan into the fire. I thought Cooper was an asshole, but he was a sweetheart next to Rhodes.
Hell, you could even have him be the reason for Cooper's death and show that he's willing to kill even his higher-ups just to get a hold of power. Rhodes' power trip is then interrupted by Dr. Frankenstein, who comes in saying that they wouldn't be able to kill all the zombies even if they tried. They now outnumber the humans 400,000 to 1, which, holy shit, they are fucked. Frankenstein then just ignores Rhodes, nearly popping a blood vessel in his forehead, and sits down asking if there's any food, which is really fucked up as well, as he's still covered in blood and we just saw him playing around with brains and guts, and that clearly did not affect his appetite. This is a direct contrast to Sarah, who nearly vomited just seeing his experiments. Further shows his loss of humanity, and yeah, the guy has almost a ghoulish look to him himself. Rhodes then starts going, but Frankenstein's still unfazed, and he says the situation's hopeless unless they can control the zombies. Frankenstein tells Rhodes that he believes he can control them, but Sarah tries to calm down Rhodes' expectations. If Rhodes dares to look at his research, then there is a chance you'll see he stole Cooper's body. And based on the speech Rhodes just gave to the group, he would definitely kill them all, which we see later is exactly what he tries to do. So yeah, good call, Sarah. Frankenstein then basically lays it out that they don't have the equipment to reverse the virus and instead just need to teach them how to do tricks and shit. Do a flip, hit the thumbs up, that sort of thing. Even the way he entered kind of shut down the idea that they have the resources to kill them all.
Where does it say we should do any one thing but shoot the mothers in the head?
We don't have enough ammunition, Captain, to shoot them all in the head. Time to have done that would have been at the beginning.
Now, before we move on, I want to take this moment to talk about Rhodes and Joseph Paleto's performance in general. This scene in particular is one that many point to as being super cheesy, and the actor just going way over the top. Siskel and Ebert even use this scene specifically in their scathing review of the film as an example of how shit Day of the Dead was.
And from the actor's point of view, I would think the actors would be smarter than this, and that is, if you start screaming in the first scene of the movie, you have no place to go.
But obviously, you know, this is a subjective thing, and maybe it works for you, maybe it doesn't, but it was how Romero intended to portray Rhodes. He said he wanted him to be fanatic and that he wasn't really sure how far to go with it, and seeing how great Paleto was when he would just completely flip his shit. Paleto even told Romero that he felt it was a bit too much and to not let him go so over the top, but Romero just said that he loved it. Paleto also had his own words for the harsh critics of the film as well, and even stuck up for Romero.
They were saying I was over the top. I say no. I said, this is the point of view. It was like, this is fucking stupid. Kill them.
When you're dealing with living dead people, you got to get a little intense.
Which is actually a really good point. Like, imagine, right, the world is complete shit and everything and everyone is most likely gone. You're humanity's last line of defense, stuck in a bunker with a bunch of scientists that you don't even understand what they're doing, and then they come to you with some shit about keeping the zombies as pets and making them do tricks. Like, dude, what the fuck? Does sound fucking stupid, and you combine that with a guy who's been taught the only way to keep order is through violence, it's not too hard to imagine that this is how they would react. Rhodes was right, I say. Rhodes is also incapable of accepting their situation and believes that it can be solved by violence and brute force because that's how the military's always done it. He sees them as being at war and thinks that the only way to win is by crushing the other side. He views everything with a military mind state. We can even see this in just the way he talks, as he doesn't say he's going to kill everyone, but instead will court-martial them.
They get court-martialed.
The government is gone, my dude. Who's gonna court-martial them? They literally just talked how society's basically gone, but Rhodes still falls back on his military orders and doesn't recognize how silly he sounds. Last thing as well before moving on, Sarah also mentions here how there could be survivors in Washington because they have more sophisticated shelters. This foreshadows the protected city-states we see in 2005's Land of the Dead, which is basically just picking up the idea of the original dropped ones for day, even though it came out like 20 years later. And to me, this has always just been a trilogy. I don't know if the other stuff counts. If it does to you, let me know below. But to me, it's always been a trilogy and always will. If only we could do that with Indiana Jones as well. After their intense meeting, Sarah and the others then talk about how she almost got popped, and John tells her and Fisher that they need to start keeping their heads down. However, Sarah still believes that they should all be working together, but John tells her that's exactly what caused the world to go to shit.
Maybe if we tried working together, we could ease some of the tensions. We're all pulling in different directions.
Well, that's the trouble with the world, Sarah darling. People got different ideas concerning what they want out of life.
Yes! Thank you, John. He's finally spelling out what we've been talking about throughout this entire trilogy, about how no one being able to work together is the reason they'll never be able to defeat the zombies. John gets it. However, him recognizing this is also what prevents him from wanting to work with the others, and it only adds to their problem. We then cut to Sarah walking away from another nightmare, and she looks over to see Miguel waking up as well. However, when he turns over, we see his torsos being held together with surgical tools, and his guts then just spill out on the floor. Sarah's experience that day is now giving her nightmares, and she's starting to lose her grip. Savini actually pulled the same trick here with using the real pig guts in a hollowed out chest, but it was extra gross for the actor who played Miguel, as he was in fact vegetarian. I think Sarah also realised as well that whether they die by zombie or bullet from Rhodes, they're gonna end up on Frankenstein's table, which is fucking terrifying as well. Not only do you get eaten by a zombie, but then you have to be operated on by a mad scientist. And who knows, maybe when you turn, there is still a bit of you that remains in there and experiences this all without any anaesthetic. We then get a little breakup scene between them where she kicks him out, and hey, good on you. Wanting to clear her head, she then goes for a walk and sees the army guys clearly drunk and fighting. Again, it's just a subtle way of showing how they're the real danger to her and the others, and them fighting amongst themselves is what's gonna bring them down. But luckily, McDermott happens to be walking by and he shuffles Sarah away. He even gives her a bit of his booze. Good man. We then get to see John and McDermott's sweet digs as he takes her out of the trailer away from the bullshit.
There it is. There it is.
We see that they've made a nice little cozy place for themselves, complete with a God bless our home sign. There's also an image of a beach showing where John wants to retire to. He says that it's a little more dangerous living this far out, but it keeps him away from the troubles. Ultimately, this is the fate they'll choose in the end, and they journey to a dangerous paradise to stay away from the overreach of the government that exists in locations like this. John also urges her to speak her mind. It's literally the first time any of the men here have asked her anything about what she thinks. However, she kind of starts to cook John and McDermott.
You have the protection of this facility, you eat our food, you drink our water, and you don't lift a finger to help. Neither one of you.
John just laughs it off though and explains that they don't really believe in what the military and scientists are trying to do, and that it's just all a waste of time. He then goes over the government records, movie negatives, and various other things that used to be stored in the cave to show how none of this matters anymore in a world run by zombies. No one gives a shit anymore. He calls the bunker a 14-mile tombstone where their research and attempts to bring society back will all just be forgotten, along with all the other relics of the world buried in the cave.
This is a great big 14-mile tombstone!
Also love how we have the response from the zombie there, which is almost kind of backing up the point that he's making.
You ain't never gonna figure it out.
He says, we've been punished by the creator who put a curse on us to show what hell was like and for destroying what we created and trying to figure it out.
We've been punished by the creator.
Now to me, this feels like an excellent parallel to Peter's line in Dawn of the Dead about there being no room left in hell. This is our punishment, and if we rebuild, we have to make sure we don't repeat history. While this seems like John and McDermott have accepted their zombie overlords, we can see they are also in denial. Despite John's big fuck the world speech, they still play house in their little trailer. Even him saying they could restart humanity highlights he hasn't lost hope and that the world may be able to return. We then find Sarah back in the lab where Fisher's trying and failing to feed a zombie some beef. Sarah realizes this is stupid, but Dr. Frankenstein then comes in and explains that they're attempting to satisfy their urge to consume flesh. He then calls back to Peter's line in Dawn of the Dead saying the zombies are us and they can be tricked by being good little boys and girls. He says this is the same way we were tricked with the promise of some reward to come, which is why we do pretty much everything. Frankenstein has some serious issues that we'll see more glimpses of in just a bit, but we can see how he treats the zombies as children. He talks to them like how you would a small child, and even shuts the lights off and leaves them in the room. The zombie even looks around scared, and it highlights it's regaining its humanity. Now you can also hear the gong theme from Dawn of the Dead playing during this scene transition. This sounds familiar, it's because it's the theme playing in the credits of Dawn. Frankenstein then takes Sarah to prove his theory, and we officially meet Bub. We learn that Frankenstein named Bub after his father, with whom he clearly had issues. His dad told him he'd never be rich, and that he was wasting his time with science. Later on, they find a tape in which Frankenstein talks to himself as his mother, where he's punishing a zombie for not doing what it's told, while telling his mother that he only needs 5 more minutes. This reveals that Frankenstein's a full-on psycho, which, yeah, we pretty much already knew, but goddamn. Based off what Frankenstein says here as well, we can see that his quest to save humanity stems from some serious family issues. Frankenstein is clearly traumatized by a sort of love or acceptance that he looked for in his parents, as he was conditioned to behave on the promise of being rich. A reward, if you will. This goes back to his emphasis on civility needing to be rewarded.
They can be tricked into being good little girls and boys, the same way we were tricked into it on the promise of some reward to come.
Now that the world has gone to shit though, in his mind, Frankenstein is trying to prove to his parents and himself that his research has value. To him, if he can reverse the zombie outbreak, he will finally be rewarded with recognition for his achievements. This is why Frankenstein treats Bub and the other zombies like children, as he believes he can beat them into submission like he was. He's not realizing though that he's creating the same cycle of trauma that he received from his father. He's even becoming a surgeon just like his father originally wanted, as his research has become more about dissection than actually studying the creatures.
Can you imagine a surgeon called Bub?
This further shows, though, that while Frankenstein is right about being able to teach the zombies, his inability to let go of his trauma will only contribute to them learning more about cruelty and violence. This also prevents him from being able to recognize the true results of his own research, as he only focuses on how to reverse it instead of the cause. Just as Sarah mentioned earlier, Frankenstein's research proves what Romero's been trying to say throughout the entire Dead trilogy, in that this is all a result of the terrible things we do to each other, and that violence is an inherent part of human nature. Romero is basically saying that restoring the world to how it was will only lead to the same result. He then shows Bub how to do some tricks and also says,
well, let's say that I let him continue to exist.
Now him saying I'll let him continue to exist shows how the Mad Doctor has developed a bit of a god complex. God punished us for getting too big for our own britches, and he brought hell to earth to destroy our hubris. Ultimately, this place is destroyed as well, and in trying to play God, it all comes crashing down. Sarah and Fisher then start cracking up laughing, thinking Frankenstein's finally lost it, as he presents Bub with a toothbrush and razor. However, they are soon made fools of when Bub grabs the razor and starts rubbing it against his cheek as if he was shaving. What? We also get a little nod to Stephen King, with one of the items Dr. Frankenstein gives Bub being a copy of Salem's Lot. Again, the pair did Creepshow together and were just super tight. We can see that Bub is also a fan of King as well, as he starts to flip through the book to Sarah's amazement. This proves that he remembers things from his life and can be taught to control his urge for human flesh. Now, while seeing a zombie reading could be quite silly, I think it actually makes the whole thing even more terrifying, because it basically proves that the person is still trapped inside the mind and forced to be piloted by this decay. Something they discuss quite a lot in the Bone Temple, and Bub definitely lays the groundwork for that. However, the little science party is then crashed by Rhodes and Steele, who come in to find Bub reading Salem's Lot. A zombie reading? Heresy! But Bub doesn't even look at the newcomers, and he's just fully engrossed in the book. This shows that not only is Salem's Lot a great book, but that Bub's ability to control himself extends past the people he's built a rapport with. Bub mimics saying hello Aunt Alicia on the phone, and even gives a salute to Rhodes. Rhodes refuses to do it back though, so Frankenstein salutes him instead, and then decides to give the zombie a gun, because why not? What could possibly go wrong? Bub then inspects the gun for a moment before cocking back the chamber, pointing it at Rhodes, and then pulling the trigger. And yeah, I am with Rhodes. Kill it! Kill it right fucking now! Now this does foreshadow their showdown later on, but it also highlights that Bub is able to judge. We then get a tense standoff and cut at the cafeteria, where Rhodes goes absolutely off it. But as Frankenstein explains, them showing civilized behaviour must be rewarded. We can also see that Frankenstein's starting to crack a bit when he says,
civility? must be rewarded, Captain. And if it isn't rewarded, then there's no use for it.
It's almost like he's trying to convince himself just as much as he's trying to convince Rhodes. And I do wonder if he's kind of remembering what his parents said and clearly cracking a bit. It also shows how his inability to let go of how things used to be is driving him even more insane than he probably already was. With everyone in a stalemate, things go back to business as usual. They round up more of the undead, but Miguel once again fucks up. The zombie rips out the throat of one of the guys, and he then fires, hitting another. Gee, who could have seen that coming? Sarah then takes control of the situation once more and shoots the zombie in the head, but Miguel fully loses it. He gets bitten on the arm when trying to take his rage out on another zombie and runs off, being chased by Sarah. Steele actually handles the situation calmly though and kills his pal, who begs for a bullet over becoming a creature. It's a side of the character that you don't see that much in the movie, and it shows how his bravado's all just a bit of an act. We then get an awesome moment where Sarah hacks Miguel's arm off with John's machete. This would also inspire some stuff in The Walking Dead, and it adds the idea that you can catch it before it spreads. We can't really show it because it's YouTube, but they have Miguel's hand moving about as Sarah sinks in the blade. This is a clever editing trick by Savini, where they used a fake arm for the shot of Sarah initially hitting it with the blade, and then used DeLeo's real arm with a fake cutout machete as she's slicing it down. They then replaced it with a fake one when she slices it completely off. It's all cut together. It looks really good, and yeah, just the little detail of the hand moving makes it just sells it. Just that little bit of detail just sells it a bit more. Don't know why I went Irish there. John and McDermott then follow her lead and help make a torch to burn Miguel's arm stump and seal the wound, while Steele, Rhodes and Rickles show up for revenge. Obviously, now they have a reason to kill him as well, as he's potentially got the disease. What we get though is a classic Mexican standoff, but Rhodes ultimately lets him keep Miguel to prevent a full-on shootout. He also calls John Flyboy, with his also being Steven's nickname in Dawn. And yeah, I know it's just a nickname for a pilot, but it just helps to reinforce those roles. This moment also allows John and McDermott to finally choose a side. They also look after Miguel, and John willingly stays back with someone he thinks might become a zombie. But they're no longer resigned to their apathy, and ultimately this is what will save them from becoming zombies themselves. Back in Frankenstein's lab, we then pan across more of his brutal experiments as McDermott realizes the true horror of what's been going on behind the scenes. Also, notice the X-ray scan of a skull that's positioned like it's looking directly at Sarah. It's not even a scan of the brain, it's just of the skull, which foreshadows one of Frankenstein's most disturbing projects. It's here that they then find the recording, which gives us some insight into Frankenstein's history. Also, I feel like the scene may have been what inspired the recordings that you find around zombie games like Resident Evil and The Last of Us. Romero did write a script for a Resident Evil film in 1998 that was ultimately rejected, but that's a story for another breakdown. As the tape plays, McDermott then discovers the severed head of the soldier who was just shot in the zombie pen. It literally happened like moments ago, and Frankie has already wired him up. He begged not to be turned into a creature, but you could definitely argue this is a much worse fate. Again, this is also the mechanical head of Greg Nicotero, and it's what landed him the role in front of the camera. Before the film's budget was reduced to nothing, Nicotero and Savini created the head to be used in the original version of the film before the scene was cut. So they cast Nicotero in the film as one of the soldiers and wrote the scene so the robot head didn't go to waste. Which I'm glad they did as well, because it's a really good effect. Realizing how insane this all is, McDermott then says they just need to take the chopper and get the fuck out. However, they run into Frankenstein in the hallway, who's on his way to give Bub his reward. Also, notice how Frankenstein greets Bub, saying his name with a southern accent.
Hello, Bob!
This is just like how he introduced his father, and it shows how he's projecting his fucked up family issues onto Bub. He also tells Bub that quote-unquote mother is very proud of him, which I'm not sure if he's referring to himself here, as he sees himself as Bub's mother. Or it might be like the mental projection he has of his mother, which is very Norman Bates.
Your mother is very proud of you. Very, very proud indeed.
In Psycho, Norman Bates, of course, keeps his mother alive, he keeps her corpse around, but it just nicely plays in the idea of zombies. Bub's also locked into the tunes, and you can see he considers biting the dock when he tries to take them off, but he decides against it, and thus Frankenstein shows him how to play the recorder. I love Bub's reaction to Beethoven's Ninth Symphony as well, and it just blows whatever is left of Bub's mind. Like giving an iPhone to a 16th century Renaissance child.
again.
Frankenstein then gives Bubs his reward, and we can see him no longer interested in Beethoven as he starts to chow down on some flesh. I wonder where Frankenstein got that from. Meanwhile, Sarah and McDermott are watching this all go down from the next room, and the party's then crashed by Rhodes and his lackeys. Also, I love McDermott's face during this whole thing, as this is the first time seeing all this weird shit that Frankenstein's been up to. Rhodes then grabs Frankenstein and demands to know what he's giving Bub. They then discover he's been keeping the bodies of the dead soldiers and feeding them to the zombies. This gives Rhodes the excuse he's been waiting for, and he immediately empties his clip into the doctor. Now, if you thought Rhodes was crazy before, this pretty much sends him over the deep end. He shoots Fisher in the head without hesitation, and you could say Fisher is now sleeping with the Fishers, eh? I don't know what the fuck that was. John then arrives to stand his ground and says he'll not fly them out if Rhodes doesn't let Sarah and McDermott go. But Rhodes just tosses them to the zombies while Steele beats the shit out of John. Kind of a piss-poor rescue there, John. We then see the zombies making their way to the dinner bell. Sarah and McDermott then decide to take their chance and head for a silo deeper in the cave. We then see Miguel leaving the bunker, and this moment of freedom's Meriden Bob, who frees himself from his chains. Now, Miguel is who brings down the zombies, but I personally think that you should have given that role to Bub. Hell, when watching this for the video, I did even start to think that you don't even really need Miguel at all. He offers no support to Sarah and the gang and spends half of the movie lying on his back. I personally think Romero should have had Bub escaping, coming across the dead dock, and then have it so he was the one who brought in the zombies. Hell, I don't even know why Miguel's so broken in general. He's like the only guy in here getting a shag. But yeah, back in the cave, all hell breaks loose with McDermott cutting a zombie's head in half with a shovel. Also, love how you can see the top half roll away and its eyes moving back and forth as Sarah and McDermott run past it. This was actually building off another brutal kill from Dawn, where Savini's character Blade killed a zombie with a machete, but he felt it would be cooler with a shovel. John also manages to get the better of Rhodes, but decides to spare him to go and find Sarah and McDermott. Going by the rules of these movies as well, this more or less guarantees his survival, as he refuses to continue the killing and instead chooses to help the others. On the flip side of this, we see the opposite side of the coin with Steels and Rickles, who find that Miguel's bust up the controls for the lift. Unlike John and the others who chose to work together, Rickles and Steele instead immediately start attacking each other when they realise neither can fix the elevator. In the pair refusing to work together, they ultimately seal their fate and are consumed because of this. We then quickly cut to John making his way through the cave to find Sarah McDermott. This gives us my favourite scene of McDermott, basically just going crazy with a shovel and barking at one of the zombies.
Gesundheit.
It's just so random, but it makes me laugh every single time. Meanwhile, John continues taking the zombies out left, right and centre, armed to the teeth, a lot like Peter was in Dawn. We then find ourselves above ground when Miguel opens the gates to the zombies. As the undead begin to flood into the compound, Miguel rushes back to the elevator to grab the controls, and he just lies down to accept his fate. We also see him sign a cross over his chest and put his saint pendant in his mouth as the zombies start to go to town. However, notice how he doesn't put his dog tags with the saint pendant and it's left on the ground. This symbolizes how in Miguel's final moments he's finally accepted the new world and its new zombie overlords. Now, I did even wonder if this played into the Jesus allegory and how Christians consume the quote-unquote body of Christ in communion. But all he can do is hope to find some salvation and give the others a chance to be better while getting his revenge on those he feels have wronged him. It's a pretty brutal way to do it, but fair play to Miguel. Would have been nice for him to come to this moment of clarity a couple of hours earlier, but yeah, suppose he came through in the end, I guess. The zombies then start tearing Miguel apart, with more flooding in as he screams in agony. However, Miguel holds on. He waits for more zombies to gather around for their free lunch, and this is so he can use them to swarm the compound. And the army guys don't react well to it. Also, I love how this zombie trips when getting off the elevator, and yeah, I imagine there was a lot of pushing each other on this, and people kind of a bit scared as they were going down. Health and safety nightmare.
Violation.
Rhodes then immediately hauls us out of there, and he hops into a golf cart and basically leaves Steels and Rickles in the dust. Along with this guy. He's just kind of been around in the background, but this is another Romero regular. That is Teisos Stavrakis, who was Tom Savini's assistant on Dawn of the Dead. Now, you might remember him as the guy who got his guts ripped out at the end, which was great times, and they basically do an evolved version of that kill, with the character getting killed in pretty much the same way. Stavrakis basically became a stuntman on Dawn because they couldn't afford any professionals and needed someone to brutalize for some of the more violent kills in the movie. Rickles gets a similar fate too, and almost kind of cackles as he screams in agony. The absolute worst part of this as well is how you can hear his scream become super high pitched as his vocal cords are being stretched until his head pops off. Savini actually didn't realise this small detail himself until years later when someone pointed it out to him. So shout out to the sound guy who mixed this. Savini also was never really with how this effect turned out, as the fake body he made was meant to stretch and tear as an homage to The Thing. But the zombie hands cover the body too much, and thus the final shot didn't achieve the same effect, which I can see what he means, but I do think it works okay. Anyway, with it now being every man for himself, we see hundreds of zombies infiltrating the bunker, not only from the elevator, but also from the zombie pen, which they forgot to close, you fucking idiots. She said at the start it was important. With Bob, we then see as he finds Dr. Frankenstein and completely breaks down. Also, yeah, maybe I'm just a little bitch, but I think this is very sad, and this moment broke me. Bob's like, I'm here, Dad, look what I did. Very stupid, but very emotional too. He then notices Sarah's gun that Rhodes left in the lab, and this sets us up for Bob versus Rhodes. Now, another small detail to point out here is notice how Bob doesn't even try and eat the doctor. This shows that Bob's love for Frankenstein has overcome his primitive drive to consume human flesh, and it proves Frankenstein's theory that zombies can be taught to control their instincts. However, we can also see how Frankenstein's greatest success is also his biggest failure, as he still taught Bob violence by projecting his own trauma onto him. Which is why the first thing Bob does when realizing Dr. Frankenstein's dead is pick up a gun. He gave him a gun earlier and thus created the same violent cycle that caused the world to fall apart in the first place. Last thing before moving on as well, and this might be a bit of a theory time, but it also seems to be implied here that whatever caused the dead to rise is now missing from the world. We don't see Frankenstein come back to life despite not being shot in the head, and the original script included John dying early on and having his body slowly decomposing rather than becoming a zombie. We never really learn what caused it in the first place, and its disappearance here is as mysterious as its arrival. Steele saying cornered as well, and among the horde we can see a ballerina who still has her foot pointed as if she's dancing. There's also this clown guy who kind of becomes a running gag for Romero and was included in both Land of the Dead and Diary of the Dead. Steele is then sworn but realizes he's screwed and thus decides to take himself out. Now, originally Steele's death was pretty cut and dry, but Gary Howard Claw, who played him, he asked Romero if they could change it while they were shooting. He does a cross thing, does a crucifix, prays to God, and you may notice that the posts that we used to chain above basically resemble a crucifix. This goes up behind him and further plays up the religious symbolism, which I feel represents how, despite Steele's pleas to God, he's already damned. By taking his own life and refusing to become a zombie, Steele is essentially also trying to avoid God's punishment. Back in the cave, we then see John has finally caught up to Sarah and McDermott, and the three of them open fire on the zombies with machine guns to clear a path. They then climb out the cave and make it to freedom, showing how if you work together, you can find a way out of this.
Come along, Johnny. Counting on you to fly us to the promised land.
You might also notice that John puts down his gun akin to Peter losing his rifle at the end of Dawn. In shedding this weapon, he's casting away violence and deciding to stop the killing to work on salvation. This is mirrored in Rhodes as well, who we cut to arming up. Confronted by Bob, he's shot while he tries to flee, and he ends up crawling away while Bob catches up to him. I love the symbolism here as well of how Rhodes is all bloody, crawling, and hunched over with a limp, looking like a typical zombie. On the flip side of this, Bob is walking upright and using a gun just like a human. Once again, it plays in the idea that people have become so removed from our humanity that we are the monsters and the zombies are now more human than we are. Which is why those who are able to hold on to their humanity and work together are always the ones who make it out alive. Rhodes then opens the door to a horde of zombies, which is just like Sarah's nightmare in the opening. Bob then shoots him again in the gut, and you can see that he uses his other hand to steady the shot before he takes aim. Before, he was just kind of firing from the hip with one hand, but this shows he's remembering things more and more. This also shows that he now doesn't need Frankenstein to teach him, and he's truly once more able to learn. As the zombies then start to swarm around Rhodes, Bob gives him one final salute before walking away and letting the zombies tear Rhodes in half. literally. But any other zombie would join in on the meal, but Bob is now controlling his urges. Also, I love how sassy Bob is as he does it. With Rhodes finally getting what he deserves though, he gasps for breath as the zombies tear off his legs and he tells them to choke on them. Now, we could easily move on because the character's dead, but yeah, there's a lot of really gross stuff behind this that is almost even worse than what we just saw. Like all the other gut gags in the film, Savini used real pig intestines strapped to Rhodes' chest that was supposed to spill out and be eaten by the zombie actors. Okay, great, we've done it 100 times before, should work. Classic zombie eating guts effect. However, when shooting the exterior scenes in Florida, someone forgot to plug in the fridge and these guts all rotted. This was throughout the whole production as well, so I'm talking them rotting for weeks. Not realizing this until the day of the shoot, they had no more time to run out and get more pig guts, so they just stuffed the rotting guts in Joseph Pilato's fake stomach and then shot the scene.
To this day, I can still smell it.
This took 4 hours to do and was so bad the crew and zombie actors had to stuff their noses with putty just to stay in the room, except for Joseph Pilato. He would of course have been able to have seen that, so he just had to breathe in the rotted guts for hours. Which you might think, wow, Paul, that's crazy, how could it get any worse? Well, remember how I said Rhodes was gasping for air as he was getting ripped in half? Yeah, he was like literally gasping and breathing in all those pig guts to his lungs. Rhodes' line of telling the zombies to choke on them was also supposedly improvised and, given what we know, might have been directed towards Tom Savini and Romero. We then see the bunker is fully overrun with zombies, feasting on the remains of everyone we just saw get killed. We also get a kind of cameo by George A. Romero as a zombie pushing a medical cart, but we only know this by seeing his signature scarf hanging from his waist. We never actually see Romero's face, which I don't know if they cut it or not, but yeah, something you would only really catch if you're a major Romero fan, or have a photographic memory and remembered that he wore this during his cameo on Dawn of the Dead. So that is the character confirmed dead. We then cut back to the surface where Sarah, John and McDermott are making their great escape. We then see them hauling ass to the helicopter to ride off into the sun, but when Sarah opens the door, bam! Grabbed by a zombie. But wait! Just as Sarah is about to get her face eaten off, we jump cut to her waking up from another nap. Rather than waking up in hell though, we see that she and the others have made it to their island paradise. John and McDermott are fishing, feeding the birds, and just having a grand old time. Not a single zombie or mobile phone in sight. Sarah then takes out a calendar showing that it's now November 4th, 5 days after we started this insanity, and we fade out to the credits. Wait, what? Now, before we get to explaining this ending, we have to take a quick moment to talk about the film's release because it was an absolute mess and a lot of people hated this movie. A major issue that hindered the film's success came from the confusion between Romero's Day of the Dead and Dan O'Bannon's Return of the Living Dead. This was released the same year and was written by John Russo, aka Romero's writing partner on Night. That is sort of an alternate sequel to Night, but it has nothing to do with Romero and isn't part of his zombie universe. But this confused a lot of people at the time and caused many to just not show up because they went to the wrong movie. It was also the serious tonal shift from Dawn of the Dead, which was more rooted in comedy. A lot of people came in expecting that same comic book feel, but when they were met with the more dark and serious tone of Day, many felt disappointed and that Romero had jumped the shark. Laurie, who played Sarah, even recalled people booing at the New York premiere. That all really affected Romero and is pretty much why he didn't make another zombie film for 20 years. But this all comes back to Romero's initial decision to wait so long to make Day. This resulted in the script having to be cut and him having to compromise his vision. We can also see this reflected in the film itself, as one reviewer, Rob Gonzalez, made the parallel of how Day reflects Romero being forced to cut down his vision to appease the ones funding it. The scientist basically represents the artist and the soldiers are the money guys who breathe down their necks demanding results. This makes Day of the Dead almost a personal expression of Romero's anger and depression.
He goes on to say, and I find this absolutely brilliant, I think part of the reason many Romero fans reacted against Day so strongly is that it showed the writing on the wall. Day of the Dead shows Romero at a low personal ebb, forced to cut down his vision to appease the guys with the money. With that in mind, you understand why the soldiers in the film are depicted as hostile thugs. If you read the scientists as film artists and the soldiers as the money guys who breathe down your neck demanding results, the money and the movie become a rather personal expression of Romero's anger and depression.
Now, while Day has been able to gain a following years later as people start to get it, let's see if we can bring some justice to Romero. Now, in order to do that, we're going to have to talk about the ending and go into what the hell just happened. So what the hell did just happen? Well, I think when you jump cut your climax and reveal that the shock was a dream, that people are gonna have some questions. Personally, I just take it that they got to the helicopter and kind of wanted one last scare before giving us a happy ending. However, there have been some theories that this entire happy ending is in fact just a dream, so I do kind of want to explore that, as I definitely think it's worth talking about. Firstly, we've seen Sarah waking up from horrific nightmares multiple times throughout the film, so the idea this was all just another nightmare was already set up for us. We also get the call back to the calendar that we saw in the very first scene of the movie, which turned out to be a dream. Now, this new calendar Sarah makes could be Romero's way of symbolizing that this is also a dream, and Sarah is envisioning them reaching their perfect safe haven. Now, beyond that, the biggest detail pointing to the island paradise not being real was given to us in the very beginning. When the group first touches down at the base, the first thing they do is debate refueling the helicopter, but they instead decide to wait.
No, wait till it's dark. There are too many of them out there.
Fast forward to their great escape, and we get a call back to this line as John mentions that he hopes someone ended up doing it.
Let's hope they filled up the gas tank from the other night.
Which is actually the last line in the entire film. Now, you could say that one of the soldiers did it during the night, as Sarah recommended, but we never saw anyone leave the bunker after they first sealed themselves in. The elevator also sets off a loud alarm when it's in use, and you'd think that someone might have picked up on it.
Jesus Christ, that's the elevator.
To me, there's really no real reason to add in this random bit about them not fueling up the helicopter, and for it to never be mentioned again until the exact moment they're about to escape, other than to point us to this perfect island being bullshit. Because of that, there is the read that Sarah and the others got eaten once they reached the helicopter, and her waking up on the island is her mind tripping on whatever crazy chemicals get released in your brain when you're about to die. Which I know is bleak, but I think it fits in with the theme of humanity being punished and the complete zombie takeover that Romero's been presenting us. However, in Romero's book, The Living Dead, he revealed that Sarah, McDermott and John did make it to the island, but ultimately did not survive, and they eventually became zombies. Yay! So there you go, theory time debunked in real time. Now maybe I'm an idiot, or maybe Romero wanted to give us a more definitive answer after deciding to make 4 more films 20 years later instead of ending it off here like he originally planned. Who is to say? Whether it's a dream or not though, I think it ultimately doesn't matter either way, as the end result's the same, and it still emphasises Romero's entire point of the Dead series. The world is damned, there is nowhere left that is safe. This is our punishment, and no one can escape it. Now this brings us back to Bob and the religious symbolism of the film. Bob is more or less playing the role of zombie Jesus, and he'll usher in this new zombie world. As we saw with Bob, not only did the zombies retain some of their sense of living consciousness, but their minds have been brought down to their most primitive state, essentially making them a blank slate without the human social conditioning that we've developed in society. This calls back to how Frankenstein treated them like children, because yeah, they basically are. They're unable to process things like caution or reasoning, and simply driven by desires. However, Bob proves that, like a child, the zombies can over time learn social behaviours. In Dawn, Romero showed us how capitalism is what caused people to lose their humanity, and this resulted in us turning on each other and being punished to hell on earth. Now though, Bob and the other zombies have been whipped of the influence of consumerism and capitalism, and thus Romero implies that there is a chance the zombies could in fact make a better world if they can avoid making the same mistakes as us. This in a way parallels the Christian idea of someone being cleansed of their sins in order to be accepted into heaven. We fucked it up, so God restored the whole thing to basically give the world another chance. Bob, being the first zombie to relearn his humanity, has essentially been resurrected and reborn as a new form of humanity that could lead the other zombies towards a better world. This is symbolised by the cross that Bob was chained to for most of the movie, and where he began to regain his consciousness. According to the New Testament as well, Jesus was first born from the dead, ushering in the kingdom of God. He then went about forgiving sins, baptising repenters, and ascended to heaven. In a twisted way, you could say that the zombies are killing us, and by becoming part of the undead, we're baptised and forgiven of our sins. It's also traditionally believed in Christianity that the bodily resurrection with the restoration to life of a transformed body is powered by the spirit, which is literally what we saw happen with Bob as he was transformed into a zombie body, powered by his primal instincts, but was resurrected by restoring his consciousness. Bob chooses to help the other zombies and teaches them compassion instead of violence. Humanity can eventually return and be forgiven for what we did to the world. However, Romero still leaves us with a sense of dread as we saw Bob has already learned cruelty and violence from Frankenstein. When figuring out that Bob was regaining consciousness, one of the first things he did was give him a gun and had him read Salem's Lot. That is a book all about community mistrust and violence as everyone in the lot becomes vampires and begins killing their family and friends. So there's an equal chance that Bob will just create the same cycle that led to the apocalypse in the first place. Yay! With Romero doubling down on the idea that the end is inevitable and humanity cannot be saved, I think that it fits in more with what he's been doing. This is why Romero ultimately leaves Bob's fate open-ended though, because our time is up. However, I do feel like it's a bit more optimistic and leaves things in the air about whether violence is inherent to our nature or if we can learn to regain our humanity and trust each other once more. Now, I know this all sounds insane, but it perfectly concludes everything Romero's been setting up since he first introduced audiences to the ghouls. In Night of the Living Dead, Romero brings in zombies as terrifying monsters that come to destroy the family unit, which is represented by our survivors trapped in the farmhouse. In Dawn, Romero then shows the destruction of community. He presents the zombies as funny and pathetic and shows the human characters committing most of the violence. There he introduces the idea that we are in fact the monsters and have done this to ourselves. In Day, Romero brings this all together by representing the zombies as victims and making us actually root against most of the human characters. We root for Bob when he's hunting down roads, and when the zombies start coming after the other soldiers, we cheer on because we know they deserve it. Now apply this to like 1 billion people. Though we know there's a few good people left, which is why they survive, they're overwhelmingly outnumbered by the bad. Ben, the sole survivor of Night who tried to save everyone, was gunned down by the mob, and in Dawn, Peter and Fran are the only ones able to hold on to their humanity. In Day, everyone in the bunker is already insane, which leaves only 3 out of the group and perhaps the world with some sense of their humanity left. This represents the underlying terror and social commentary that Romero was trying to convey in these films of humanity being doomed and that we in fact deserve it. Romero also saw the Dead films as an allegory for humanity having failed and needing to make a new path. Day of the Dead just brings things full circle from that very first film, and it shows the zombie uprising as being complete. Now, while Day of the Dead is widely considered the worst of Romero's Dead films, it actually has a lot of deeper layers that I think most people miss that make it a perfect conclusion to this original Dead trilogy. I mean, we got zombies listening to Beethoven and shooting a gun. It's absolutely ridiculous, so I don't blame anyone for not liking the movie and maybe the symbolism going over their heads. But hey, if it didn't, I wouldn't have a job. Not everyone is a Romero expert, knows his strong social views, but it was always the central theme of these movies and what he ultimately wanted to convey to audiences with his stories of ghouls and monsters. Now, I know this video has been a lot of tangents, but I think these things are important when discussing these movies, as it was always Romero's intention to use the zombies as a vehicle for social commentary. So, thank you for sticking around, and while this was always my least favourite, I have grown to appreciate it. Going through it's just given me a newfound respect for it, and yeah, I can see why Romero had this as his favourite. And if you've been keeping up with our breakdowns of these films, then hopefully you have too, and have come out with a better understanding of what Romero wanted us to take away from this. Or you can still hate it, that's totally fair too. But as always, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think Day of the Dead's Romero's worst? Will you bow to our new zombie overlords? Let me know in the comments below. Also, huge shout outs to our researcher and writer TJ, who's gone through all these movies with me, being a massive help when discussing all the society stuff. We're living in a society, and yeah, if you want to follow him on Twitter, that'll be linked on screen right now. You can go check him out. Did you know as well, members of the channel also get early access to videos like this every single week for just 99 cents a month, and yeah, for that, for low cost, I think it is anyway, you'll get access to at least 4 breakdowns a week before anyone else. Sorry, not a week, a month. Fucking hell, I'm not writing all this shit all the time. But yeah, huge thank you for joining us, and I'll see you on the next one, and I hope you've enjoyed us going through these 3 movies. By the way though, I've been your host Paul, you've been the best, and I'll see you next time. Take care, peace.